Cynthia Browning has been a state representative since 2006, when she ran for the legislature to represent Arlington, Sunderland, and Sandgate, back when that was a one-member district. The district was reconfigured into a two-member district that now includes Manchester but not all of Sunderland, following a reapportionment in 2012. Representative Browning has served for 7 consecutive terms in the State House and is hoping to return for an eighth, but this year she will be running as an independent, not as a Democratic Party candidate. As such, she won't be on the ballots voters will cast during the primary election to be held on August 11th, and for which early voting is already well underway. She will be appearing on the ballot during the general election in November. Voters can also write in her name for the primary if they wish. We recently had a chance to talk with Representative Browning, who is also a member of the Arlington Select Board, about the issues facing the state and the district and her reasons for running for re-election as an independent. All right. Well, Representative Browning, thank you very much for making the time available to talk with us today about some of the issues you're concerned with as you run for another term in the state legislature representing the Bennington 4 district. That includes Arlington, Manchester, Sandgate, and most of Sunderland. So, but I guess just to kind of get us started here, you're running as an independent this year as opposed to as a Democrat as you've run for the past, I guess it would be what, 7 election cycles. Can you tell us a little bit about what prompted that decision to run as an independent?
Sure, thank you for the question. I'm running as an independent because towards the end of this past session, it became clear that the session is not over when I think about it, but when we adjourn, because we're going to come back into session in August to deal with the budget. But towards the end of the session we were in, it became clear that the House Democratic leadership was not able to tolerate my independence. The fact that I insist that policies be based on reality, that they really work, not just be based on ideology and politics. I insisted that the rules of the House be followed rather than suspending them out of fear during the emergency. And they just made it really clear by removing me from my committee assignment and I would say bad mouthing me to the press. They made it really clear that they were not interested in supporting my independence. I have always put what I think is right according to my principles and my knowledge and what's best for our communities ahead of everything else. I've put it against any kind of political ambition or personal ambition. I've always tried to tell the truth to those in positions of power. And right now, House Democratic leadership does not want to hear my views. So that has gone so far as to be supporting the opponents against me in the primary. And it was clear that it was going to be very difficult for me to get through that because of the actions of people from Montpelier trying to choose our representatives. So at this point, I think as an economist, my services are really, really important in dealing with the pandemic emergency and the recession, the economic emergency that has resulted. And I really want to give the voters the opportunity to see whether or not they want me to serve them again. And I thought the best way to do that was to run as an independent, because then I go right on the November ballot and I didn't have to go through a primary where the whole party was working against me. So I will be on the ballot in November as an independent, and the voters of this district will decide whether or not I serve them again, not people from Montpelier.
And they can still write you in the August primary ballot if they want to,
That is correct.
the Democrat
That is correct.
or Republican ballots.
That is correct. If they want to show support for me, they can write me in on the primary.
Okay. Well, I guess what are your concerns going forward, assuming the pandemic eventually plays itself out, and let's say by next January we're kind of back to some kind of new normal. Is the state budget going to be like horribly underwater at that point with all the emergency borrowing that we've had to do just to kind of keep things together until then?
Well, first of all, Exactly what we're going to do has not yet been determined, because what we did at the end of June is we just passed our first quarter budget. So that's just the first 3 months of the fiscal year. So in August, we'll actually get revenue updates, and then we will do the budget for the rest of the year. As of right now, we think there's a $300 million revenue shortfall for the state. When we get the forecast in August, that may be bigger or that may be smaller, or it may turn out that there's some federal funds available to help us with their budget deficit. But right now, we don't have that. So we face real difficulties in terms of, do we cut spending at a time when Vermonters need state services more than ever? Do we borrow more money, which we've tended to be reluctant to do? What do we do? I think we have to borrow money. I think we should be issuing special, victory bonds, just the way everybody's growing vegetables now. They're having community gardens and victory gardens. We should have victory bonds, or we can call them something else, resilience bonds or corona bonds, I don't know. But we should be issuing bonds to help to balance the state budget, and also to make investments in housing, in broadband, in healthcare, any of those things to generate the services that Vermonters need. We will have to pay those things back. It's not nothing to borrow more, but this is a real emergency. And the last thing you want to do is to cut spending on services Vermonters need, or God forbid, to raise taxes. It's the worst possible thing to raise taxes during a recession. And unfortunately, the legislature actually have raised property taxes. I voted against that.
On education taxes, I guess. And I see that you, in a recent letter to the Manchester Journal, took issue with the notion of raising property taxes at this point in time. But I mean, what's the downside to borrowing? We're going to, as you said, we're going to have to wind up paying that back with interest eventually. And I mean, isn't that also kind of a troubling scenario as well?
Yes, you have to pay back borrowing. However, interest rates are very, very low. Ordinarily, I would not be saying borrow more, but this is a crisis. This is an emergency. And I think it's justified to borrow more when you're in a crisis and an emergency. During World War II, remember, there were all those war bonds. All the people in the United States took their savings and put them into war bonds to support the war effort. They essentially lent their savings to the government in order to prosecute the war. Now, this is a much smaller scale. We're just talking about Vermont. But I think that if we ask Vermonters who are trying not to spend too much, Vermonters are really nervous. Businesses, farms, individuals, families were uncertain about the future, so we're not going to be spending as much. And we should save more. But the question is, where do those savings go? Why not give Vermonters the chance to buy Vermont bonds, to lend their money to the state government, to make the investments that we need in broadband and in housing, and to balance the budget? That's what I see. It is not nothing to do that. You will have to pay it off in the future. That's why you need to be sure that borrowed money is spent really well and invested so that it will generate productivity. The interest rates are low, and I don't think this is the time to worry about our bond rating. I think we need to do what's right for Vermonters. But if we're going to borrow more, we can't just be pulling out a credit card and charging anything. We have to have strict rules about what the money is going to be used for and how it's going to be used.
Well, let me pivot slightly and talk about something that's somewhat related to that. And it's a subject that I guess a few years ago seemed to be fairly prominent in some of the discussions, but kind of has receded to the back row, if you will, it seems like anyway. And that's the question of the unfunded pension obligations that the state already has to its teachers and other state workers. I mean, I've heard a variety of numbers about how big that is, anywhere from a couple of $billion to more $billion. I mean, but that seems like one of those classic kick the can down the road kind of things, where the legislature has postponed the day of reckoning with paying back those, or paying into that pension obligation fund. Uh, doesn't sound like this is a good year to kind of make too much progress on that either. Is that just simply a building a problem that's going to fester away and really be expensive to, let's say, the next generation of Vermonters if it's not dealt with now?
Yes, it is. And in fact, if it was up to me, I would make doing the extra borrowing conditional on dealing with that problem, or at least putting us on a track to deal with that problem. Your very question illuminates one of the difficulties here, which is that we're not totally sure of the dimensions of the problem. And the reason for that is that it changes. This is so difficult because when the actuaries evaluate our pension system, funds put aside, and the people who will be getting the pensions, periodically they evaluate that and they say, well, you know, people are living longer and they have higher salaries at the time they retire, therefore you need to put aside more money. So then all of a sudden our debt gets bigger. So it's not as if we have a set, okay, this is $1 billion in debt and just pay it down over time. Because we've been trying to do that. The problem is what you think is $1 billion or whatever will suddenly be $1.5 billion, because of the changes in the results of the actuarial analysis. And this is because it's a defined benefit plan, not a defined contribution plan. We cannot afford to keep doing this. You can't have a debt that keeps getting bigger even though you did nothing. That's the root of the problem. And that's what I see the leadership in the House and Senate are unwilling to really face. My understanding is that got to a point where they are willing to consider having an outside expert analyze the situation and make recommendations. In the midst of this whole crisis, I'm not sure that's going to get done. But to me, extra borrowing would be conditional on getting that done, because the unfunded pension liabilities are a form of debt, and they've been growing even though we haven't borrowed more. It's this spooky nature of the fact that the debt can grow, even though it's the same people, it's the same benefits, because the actuaries look ahead and see how much is it going to cost for you to make these pension payments to these people, and all of a sudden the debt gets bigger. That's what's so spooky about it. That's why people can't agree about it, and that's what we have to address. And the Democratic leadership has not been willing to address it. They just view it as an attack on state employees and teachers, which it is not. Because if we don't address this, they will eventually not get their pensions, because we cannot afford to pay more and more and more and more of the state budget to this. We have to fix this. It's in order to protect those pensions that we have to fix it.
Um, you mentioned affordable housing a couple of times a moment ago in the course of talking about some of the issues you're concerned with, and I know that that's been an issue down in the Arlington area. The Arlington Area Renewal Project has focused on that to some degree over the past year or so. I guess I'm just wondering, what do you think should be the proper role of the state government in trying to promote more affordable or workforce housing, as the expression sometimes goes?
Yeah, I think that one of the problems is that our housing stock, um, more houses have been built at the upper end than at the lower end. You know, in other words, more really big, ritzy houses have been built because those are the people with money, and not enough workforce housing has been built. But even when there are smaller houses, some of them have been bought and are being rented. There was a big trend for a while of people buying lots of apartments and turning them into B&B rentals. So the Airbnb kind of was starting to take some of our rental housing out of the long-term rental and turning into short-term rental. Now that may be changing because right now not as many people are traveling. But we really need to look at how housing stock is being used. But if you want more housing, either you have to build more, or if you want more affordable housing, either you have to build more housing or you have to give money to people, subsidize their rents. And so those are the two basic ways. And I'm willing to consider either one of those. I like the idea of renovating existing housing, because I know in our area, just in Arlington, We have a number of houses that have a decent structural integrity, but they're in disrepair. So if we could have a way that those houses are bought by a developer or a nonprofit, renovated with help from the state, and then go back on the market with rules in terms of how much they're going to cost, that would be a way to do it. Because then you're not having to buy land and build a whole new house. You're renovating our existing housing stock. And that, to me, is the most promising way to go. But you need to be sure that there are sufficient rules so that developers don't abuse it or tenants don't abuse it. And that's a tricky thing. But I'm definitely open to a new housing bond.
We have time for, I think, probably about one more question, which is unfortunate. There's certainly a lot of issues out there that are worth discussing. And you had mentioned broadband a couple of times, and I also think that that's clearly a subject that will be discussed a lot between now and November. But I guess I just wanted to ask you, one of the issues that the legislature was occupied with earlier this year, before the pandemic kind of shut things down, it was paid family leave. Where did you wind up landing on that whole subject? Is that going to be, if you're reelected and you're back in the legislature next year, is that going to be an issue that you think that the legislature needs to grapple with, or are we kind of done with that for a while?
No, I don't think we're done with that. I think we'll need to come back with that one way or the other. As viewers may or may not remember, we ended up with two competing programs. One was the legislature's, which was mandatory for caring for a family member, and then you could buy in if you wanted leave for yourself, paid leave for yourself. And the governor's program, which was a voluntary program, he was going to offer the paid leave, family medical leave, to state employees, and then allow other businesses and other individuals to buy into that program. The pandemic situation has put his program on hold. I supported his program because it was less expensive, it was voluntary, and I think that's the way you want to start a program like this. If we had had the legislative program in place, it wouldn't have helped people who had to take care of someone who was in quarantine or who had to be in quarantine themselves. And if we'd had it in place, we might not have gotten the federal benefits under unemployment, which gave people unemployment if they had to quarantine or if they had to take care of their children, because we would have had a competing state program. So I think experience with the pandemic has highlighted how important this is. Exactly how to get it done is still a question. I support starting with a moderate program that is voluntary, and then we can build on that. Because the other thing that's really clear is that given the pandemic, the legislature's program would have cost more than they thought, and that would mean the payroll tax would have been more. So we need to be very careful about this, and we need to design the new program so that it could provide paid leave under these kinds of COVID situations. So I'm sure we're coming back to that, and I know that my experience and my knowledge as an economist will help me to contribute to designing something effective.
Okay, well, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there for now, Representative Browning, but we'll have another opportunity to have you discuss your views, I'm sure, between now and the general election in November. And again, just to reiterate what we said at the start of the show, for those who might have missed it, even though you won't be on the primary ballot in August, people can write you in if they want, and you will be on the November general election ballot and facing off against whoever emerges from the Democratic primary election on August 11th. So a lot more to come.
Yes, thank you so much, Andrew. And if I could just say that people can find my reports, including a report on the legislative session that that just passed from July, at www.cynthiabrowning.com. And I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.
All right, well, there you have it. Thank you again, Representative Browning. Really appreciate you taking the time to share your views with us and talk about some of the main issues that are confronting the state during this most unusual time. Let's hope it's unusual
Excellent.
anyway.
I hope so too. Yes.
All righty. Well, thank you again, and we'll see you on the campaign trail, such as it may be.
All right then. Thank you.
For the GNAT-TV News Project, I'm Andrew McKeever.